Women will fuck you over. Just so we're clear, let me repeat myself. Women will fuck you over. They aren't necessarily malicious about it, at least so far as malice implies intent, but make no mistake, women will fuck you over. I often wish that when I was younger, someone with my experiences had shared that knowledge with me, sat me down and said, "This is how it is." Of course, I probably wouldn't have listened. Like all men, I was born a proper white knight. I used to have this picture in my head of women as angelic perfection. They were gentle, kind, and compassionate, universally. By the time I was through high school, however, I had realized that some women were selfish, egomaniacal bitches, their every action dictated by their own best interest. I assumed that this was atypical. After all, I knew many women who did not display this behavior. Well, not often, at any rate. Like the fool I was, I married young, as the whirlwind of blissful infatuation slowly gave way to the growing awareness that our fading passion was all we had in common. Her behavior toward me changed. When I was independent, entertaining friends or otherwise not doting on her every whim, she would become nagging, jealous, and emotionally manipulative. If I was kind, accommodating, and useful, she would be derisive, overbearing, and critical. After my first divorce, it was clear to me that even apparently good women could turn into self-centered bitches. Now that I knew what to look for, I could see the pattern everywhere. Women taking whatever action they deem necessary to get what they want, not at all caring who's hurt in the process, not really aware that others even can be hurt. Their lovers, friends, family, their own children were all pawns to them. All that mattered was the pursuit of their own elusive happiness, then blaming anyone but themselves when they can't manage to attain it, taking their frustration out on the man who has dedicated his life to her happiness when they can't manage to trade him in for a more prestigious model, somehow blaming him for each of her badly concealed affairs. But still, I clung to the belief that the perfect woman must surely exist, that one in a million who shared my interests, sexual fetishes, and beliefs. A perfect match. This misconception led to my being ensnared again. Although my requirements for a spouse were more stringent on the second pass, with surprisingly little trouble, I found someone who would conform to all my requirements. And for a time, it appeared that I had found the perfect mate. Until she too became dissatisfied. She then exhibited the very same behavior as my first wife. She lost interest in all the things I thought we had in common. I found that I had effectively married the same woman twice. As I watched friends and co-workers' marriages and relationships fall apart in an eerily similar manner, it became clear that nearly every man who's been divorced could tell a variant of this same story. Most men eventually come to these same conclusions at some point in their life. Some recognize it right away, others must be burned a few times. At 2 marriages, I found I was fairly average. After my second divorce, I accepted that all women, without exception, are narcissistic bitches. Now I realize that this might sound like I hate women. I don't really think that's the case, or rather, no more than I hate everyone. Indeed, if I can be labeled a misogynist, let me assure you that my misandry knows no bounds. I don't hate women. One might say I'm more critiquing than criticizing them. Women are fundamentally different than men, and yes, it probably comes down to their vaginas. Imagine a small hunter-gatherer community. Changing seasons has forced migration, and predators are likewise out looking for an easy meal. As a man and his pregnant mate push their way through a stand of bracken, they disturb the rest of a wild boar. There's a stand of trees nearby, representing safety from the half-starved, aggressive omnivore, but too distant to reach in time. What do each of these individuals do? The man could, of course, easily outrun the pregnant woman, reaching the safety of the trees and making his mate the easier target. But he does not. Instead, noting that more time is needed for his mate to reach safety, he stands to face the threat. The woman could stay and fight with the man, increasing the chances of the pair's survival overall. Will she? Of course not. Making use of the opportunity afforded by her man's sacrifice, she runs to safety, only then pausing to worry about the welfare of her mate. This isn't unreasonable behavior. Due to a long gestation period, women invest more time into reproduction than men. If something happens to a man immediately after copulation, his genetic material may still be passed on. If the female were to die in pregnancy, the line is broken. Thus, a man will instinctively protect a woman, and a woman will instinctively protect herself. Despite my earlier absolute statement, not everyone will follow the same pattern as our hypothetical couple, but it's easy to see that a man who sacrifices his mate will have trouble passing on his genes, and a woman who puts herself in danger likewise. Indeed, if a man becomes incapable of taking proper care of her through death or otherwise, a well-adjusted woman must be ready and willing to move on to a more stable situation. Yes, I'm saying that women are biologically engineered to be self-centered cunts. Women don't seem to realize they're doing it, fully convinced of their own loyalty right up until the moment they change their minds. This is unlikely to change. Women will always be self-absorbed bitches, just as men will always be jealous assholes. It's who they are, and it's our task as men to learn how best to deal with this. If that were the extent of the problem, a general embracing of the philosophy of Stoicism might serve a man quite well. But this is where it gets nasty. The already difficult interplay between the sexes is no longer a matter of individual relationships. As feminine philosophy continues its encroachment on first world society, so too does their biological propensity of seeing men as disposable utility, a tool to be used, broken, and discarded. A catastrophe that culls a society's women may cause it to fail, but it takes a relatively few number of men to repopulate. Thus women are biologically more important. This theme is so foundational to human culture that you'll find it everywhere, and it is a far easier concept for society to embrace that women are oppressed than it is for men. This is compounded by the perception that men are biologically superior in most other respects. How could women oppress men? Simple. This very attitude facilitates it. The mechanic through which this was made possible is called feminism, although feminists will define their ideology as embracing equality for men and women alike. Feminism takes as a basic tenet that women are an underprivileged minority. As this premise exists independent of facts or even achievement of its goals, feminism becomes an ideology that promotes overt female privilege over all other groups. The feminist machine has put you, as a man, in a difficult position. Let me set the stage for you. The first thing you will have no doubt heard about is the wage gap myth. According to the United States Department of Labor, and I quote, "The differences in raw wages may be almost entirely the result of the individual choices being made by both male and female workers." End quote. The root of this phenomenon is simply men are more likely to seek employment that pays well, and women are more likely to seek employment they find rewarding. Women do not make less than men for the same job. This would, in fact, already be illegal. But despite its lack of factual foundation, you can expect policymakers to use the myth in practice, meaning it will be that much harder for you to find work or get promotions due to the pressure on employers to rectify this mythical problem. You may find it interesting that although women in aggregate earn less than men, women as a whole control an estimated 70 to 80% of household finances. No doubt this could be framed as yet another way women are oppressed by men, but it could also be interpreted as a man's income being merely an extension of a woman's total earning potential. Although women are already more likely to graduate from college than men, you'll find that female-only scholarships exist to help them out. No such programs exist for men, Additionally, if trying to enter a STEM field, women will be encouraged and assisted by universities and industry. Where men are usually on their own, these measures have worked, and women under 30 now out-earn their male counterparts. Somehow, though, even while programs for women's education continue to thrive, there are still no such reciprocal programs. In the rush to fix an imagined systemic gender bias against women, it has become a reality for men. A similar phenomenon is apparent in healthcare. The life expectancy of women is greater than that of men, and as advances in medicine are made, this gap continues to expand. And it's not limited to inequality in funding. There is disproportionate social urgency in addressing male and female health concerns. When's the last time you saw a prostate cancer ribbon? Even Movember, perhaps the most well-known attempt at men's health awareness, often comes under harsh criticism in a variety of contrived ways. Then there's reproductive rights. A woman who gets pregnant and elects not to keep the baby can opt out of motherhood. Only a misogynist would suggest a man should have any say at all. But he's still expected to support a woman after she independently decides to keep the child. To not do so is illegal. Fatherhood is mandatory. I always hear, well, he decided when he put his dick in her. But who would dare posit such an argument to a woman? Should she emotionally manipulate him into sex, steal his sperm from a used condom, go so far as to use drugs or alcohol to impair his judgment, he's still legally responsible. Even though, when genders are reversed, anyone would call it rape. Attempts to develop male contraceptives are an uphill battle against feminist-led social stigma. A man has no rights over his own reproduction. If you've ever had the misfortune to go through a divorce, particularly one with children, it will have been obvious to you that men are not treated equally under the law. In child custody, motherhood is considered a sacred office, not to be interfered with, while fatherhood is a quirk of fate, at best incidental. Then there are women-only shelters, safe spaces, career assistance, and welfare programs, which in turn means that men are far more likely to be homeless or have trouble finding employment. Society grants women a special privileged status, not extended to men. Accusations of rape and abuse are always taken more seriously from a woman, despite that they're no more likely to experience either than a man. Indeed, laws in many places go so far as to exclude men from legal protections, and police will usually treat a man as the aggressor, even if he calls them for help when he is the victim. It takes no more than an accusation for society to assume a man guilty, and the measures used to verify policies intended to protect women is how much they increase said accusations. If you aren't attracted to a woman who approaches you, you're a misogynist with patriarchal views of beauty. If you express interest in a woman who isn't attracted to you, you're a misogynist and a shitlord who feels entitled to her attention. The sheer amount of discrimination you'll face, based solely on your gender, is staggering, not least of which is the outrage, harassment, and ridicule you'll receive if you're foolish enough to mention it. And still, this is not enough. Feminist activists are paranoid narcissists who believe that if they don't get what they want all the time from everyone, then it must be because people hate them and actively want to make them unhappy. It then follows logically that people must hate all women, because narcissism. It's very important not to conflate woman with feminist. Feminists are a small vocal group whose ideology most women would strongly disagree with if the feminists were honest about their goals. Because of their dishonesty, many young women identify as feminist, even though they do not participate in feminist behavior. Indeed, why not call themselves egalitarian, as this is what feminists define feminism to be? However, simply contrasting their rhetoric to the definitions they give handily explains why they don't simply refer to themselves as egalitarian or even humanist. Anyone who disagrees with the feminist currently complaining about how hard her life is will be quickly labeled a misogynist. Yes, This means that when two feminists disagree, each will assume the other is suffering from internalized misogyny, or self-hatred. Similarly, the group mind of misogynists is called the patriarchy. This is an Illuminati-like shadow organization that exists solely to keep women in check and to ensure all positions of influence are held by men, or of course those women with internalized misogyny. I don't expect you to take my word for it. Indeed, I hope you do not. Much of the problem is that both men and women have been systematically lied to. You should do your own research. If you have not already done so, you should look into the men's rights movement. A good starting point would be with Straughan, also known online as Girl Writes What. In her Dismantling Feminism series, she not only provides an insightful look into gender inequality, but is careful to cite her sources, something you rarely see feminists do. Clearly not all women advocate for this system. In fact, most probably don't realize it's this bad, and some, such as Karen, actively advocate against it. But feminists have gained such control over our social institutions and the public discourse in general that these problems are by and large systemic. Why do we as a society tolerate it? Why do men tolerate it? Because we love women. We want to make them happy, and we're willing to sacrifice ourselves to do so. But surely men deserve to be happy as well. As far as we can claim, any individual can be so entitled, and to be happy, at some point a man has to start thinking about himself. He will have to learn to navigate the minefield that feminists have laid down between the sexes, to the detriment of both. The first question a man should consider is if he wants a relationship at all. If you do not desire a relationship, this is understandable, and a growing number of men are reacting in this way. To quote a fellow YouTuber,
"Even if society was so accommodating to us that male suicide rates dropped in line with female suicide rates, even if domestic violence shelters became the norm, even if men are not given tougher sentences for the same crimes, many of us will still never voluntarily return to the reservation." You see, what may have started out as a response to the worst excesses of third-wave feminism has quickly morphed into an honest understanding of male and female nature. And based upon this understanding, men realize that there is so much more for us out there, and the surest way for a man to ruin any hope of joy he has in this life is to settle down into a relationship.
Choosing to avoid a serious relationship, or even women in general, is called MGTOW, or men going their own way. Of course, what it is to be MGTOW is subjective, and not everyone who identifies with this group take the same position that I just referenced from CS MGTOW, but there are an ever-growing number who do. This way of life is not for me, as I enjoy the companionship provided by a female partner. But if this appeals to you, I recommend Stardusk's excellent series on the subject. Ultimately, one needs to consider what a woman brings to the table. Of course, she can bring the same sort of things a man does. Income, useful property, basic social interaction, assistance with household maintenance. But for those things, how is she different than a roommate? Ideally a male one, as he's unlikely to complain about the women you bring home. Then there's traditional gender roles. You might think you want a woman to sew, cook, and clean, but then it's in your own best interest to learn these skills anyway, and there's no reason to believe she'll be any better at it than you are. In any event, allowing yourself to be mothered by your partner is ultimately not in your own best interest. Then there is, of course, sex. Specifically, regular, reliable sex. If the feminist rhetoric is any indication, this is the aspect of a relationship that women assume men want. The currency that women pay for the benefits of having a man. A currency that is expected to be accepted, even if it's only the suggestion of a possibility of sex. The problem here is that it's very simple to reduce this kind of relationship down to a value of services rendered. If sexual gratification is all a man wants, then why not turn to prostitution? The truth is that most women are really bad at sex, and the cost of an average relationship is quite high. Prostitution may be illegal in your area, and of course I would never advocate for something illegal, but a prostitute will give you a far better return on your investment, as will simple pornography and masturbation. In light of this, it should not surprise you that most women are horrified by both prostitution and pornography. These things threaten to undermine the currency they see as their birthright. There are many variations to this general theme. Some men prefer hookups or even casual dating while still trying to maintain his masculine identity. I think this is worse than avoiding women entirely for a couple of reasons. As I mentioned, pornography and masturbation are generally better than sex, at least in the case of an unfamiliar partner. People inevitably respond to this with the tired, "then you're doing it wrong." Of course, I would posit that if I'm not enjoying myself, then she's doing it wrong. But I digress. The fact is, there are many activities better than sex. Unless the woman is extremely experienced or is very familiar with your body, the sex is not likely to be very good. Unless you enjoy the game, you aren't likely to derive much satisfaction from random hookups. Worse yet, playing the field can still cost a great deal of time and money before the payoff even takes place, and there's no guarantee that any engagement will lead to sex until well after the investment is made. Prostitution is, by and large, a more honest proposition for both parties involved. Casual sex can also lead to second hookups, leaving her an opening into manipulating you into a far more traditional relationship. Before you know it, she'll be suggesting combining your finances, and her arguments will even seem reasonable to you at the time. At this point, you're entirely fucked. If you're not actually looking for a monogamous relationship, this can be a dangerous path to tread. Of course, not everyone advocates avoiding women. A different but sometimes complementary school of thought is espoused by men's rights activists. MRAs are the natural counterpoint to feminists. They believe that instead of men changing their behavior to cope with the rising acceptance of blatant misandry in society, law, and media, men and women should work together towards a more egalitarian society. In theory. In practice, they far too often take up the very same rhetoric on behalf of men that feminists use for women. This is sad because the facts are almost entirely on their side, and real progress might be made by reasoned discourse and educational effort. Okay, not really. Although I highly recommend you get involved in the men's rights movement and help with the spread of actual facts about gender discrimination, I don't think this will be an effective strategy for change. The root of the problem is emotional, a reflex response to what seems to some as self-evident, intuitive, not rational. It won't be resolved through reason. Society does, has always, and always will, care more about women than men. So it makes sense that without the participation of the majority of women, change will be impossible. Women will not advocate for change until society stops giving them what they want. Further, it needs to be clear to all involved that change would be in the best interest of women in general. In this regard, MGTOW is probably doing more for the advancement of men's rights than are men's rights activists, because they advocate a departure from orthodoxy, and it seems to work well for men who embrace it. It's not hard to understand why men's rights movements face such harsh criticism by the mainstream. Keep in mind that no one in the men's rights movement hates women. They're simply reacting naturally to the growing vitriolic hate speech and systemic prejudice against men. Very few people, and almost no men, hate or even dislike women. Misogyny is not much of a thing in Western society, and doesn't exist except in such places where feminists have managed to cultivate it. Although the men's rights movement can help men who feel lost and ostracized by society find their way, and MGTOW in particular, could lead to real change eventually, affecting meaningful change will be a slow process, and men need a solution now. So we finally come to the actual purpose of this video. I propose that men need not give up the traditional relationship entirely, but it's past time we stopped giving in. By understanding what women really want, what makes men attractive to them, and by following a few simple rules, it may be possible to enjoy the company of women while still protecting yourself legally and emotionally. This is the first of a 9-part series in which I will outline my thoughts on these issues and their potential solutions. Keep in mind this is a work in progress. I can and probably will update these videos based on feedback, criticism, and as my skills at editing improve. Thanks for watching. To be continued in part 2. Be prepared to lose her.